My name is Leo Peterson, and I'm 21 years old now, but the story that really defined my family, the one that gets told over hushed tones at holiday dinners, happened when I was just a kid, probably 7 or 8. I live in Maple Creek, Oregon, a town that feels like it's perpetually wrapped in the scent of damp pine needles and fresh-cut lumber. It's the kind of place where you know your mailman's kids' names and the high school football team's successes and failures are the town's collective heartbeat. Growing up here was simple, idyllic even. My world was small and secure, bordered by the thick forest behind my house and the familiar, friendly faces downtown. I was a quiet kid, the kind who preferred a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils to a soccer ball. My imagination was my playground, and I spent hours drawing intricate worlds filled with monsters and heroes, detailed maps of places that only existed in my head. My parents, David and Sarah Peterson, were the anchors of my world. My dad worked at the local lumber mill, a man whose hands were calloused but whose heart was gentle. He was a man of few words but deep principles. My mom was a librarian at the county library, a woman who believed in the power of stories and the importance of standing up for what's right. They weren't flashy people. They were honest, hardworking, and they loved me fiercely. They encouraged my art, celebrated my weird little drawings, and never asked me to be anything other than who I was. School, for the most part, was an extension of this safe world. I went to Maple Creek Elementary, a classic red brick building with squeaky floors and the lingering smell of chalk dust and floor wax. And that year, the year it all happened, I was in Mrs. Collins's class. She was a thin woman with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin on her face. She had this way of smiling without it ever reaching her eyes. She wasn't mean, not at first, just odd. She had her favorites, kids who were neat and quiet and always had the right answer. I was quiet, but I wasn't neat. My desk was a chaotic swirl of pencil shavings, half-finished drawings, and eraser dust. My mind was always wandering off into the forests of my imagination, and Mrs. Collins didn't seem to appreciate unscheduled travel. The first crack in my perfect little world appeared during art time. We were supposed to be painting our favorite season. I chose autumn, and I poured all my effort into capturing the fiery reds and oranges of the maple trees that gave our town its name. I even added a little gray squirrel with a bushy tail, burying an acorn. I was proud of it, but when Mrs. Collins came around, she just pursed her lips. She pointed at my squirrel. Leo, the assignment was to paint a season, not a zoo animal. She held up the painting of a girl named Brittany, which was just a few neat, perfectly spaced orange and red dots on a page. See, class, Brittany followed the instructions perfectly. A small knot of shame tightened in my stomach. It was the first time my art, my own little world, had been rejected. Things started to get worse after that. A little spill of paint water on the floor earned me a note home. Forgetting to put my name on a worksheet meant I had to miss recess to redo it, while she'd gently remind other kids to just add their name at the top. It was a slow, creeping chill. I started to dread going to school. The joy I once felt was replaced with a constant, low-level anxiety. I stopped drawing as much in class, afraid of her critical gaze. My mom noticed first. She always did. She saw the way I get quiet when she asked about my day, the way my report card started having comments like "Leo needs to focus more" or "Leo is often distracted." My grades, which had always been fine, started to slip. It wasn't that I was failing, but there was a noticeable dip. My mom, being a librarian, knew the value of a child's early education. She knew that a teacher who crushes a child's spirit could do lasting damage. She tried talking to Mrs. Collins at a parent-teacher conference. She brought up her concerns gently, asking if there was anything they could do at home to help me focus. Mrs. Collins was dismissive. She told my mom, well, some children just aren't as academically inclined as others. Perhaps Leo's talents lie elsewhere. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She was writing me off. At 7 years old, that was when my parents decided they had to do something more. They weren't the type to cause a fuss, but when it came to me, their protective instincts were a force of nature. They believed in the system. They believed in fairness, so they decided to go to the principal. The principal of Maple Creek Elementary was a man named Mr. Albright, and Mr. Albright was a local hero. He was charismatic, funny, and he had this incredible talent for remembering every single student's name. He'd be out in the front of the school every morning, giving high fives, telling jokes. We all loved him. He was the kind of principal you see in movies, the one who slides down the hallway and makes school feel fun. To us kids, he was a superstar. So when my parents scheduled a meeting with him, they expected a reasonable conversation. They thought he, of all people, would understand their concerns and help find a solution. My dad told me about that meeting years later, his voice still tight with the memory of it. They sat in Mr. Albright's office, a room filled with sports trophies and smiling photos of students. They laid out their concerns calmly and rationally. They talked about Mrs. Collins's strange behavior, her favoritism, the way she seemed to be singling me out, and the impact it was having on my love for learning. Mr. Albright listened, nodding, his face a mask of concern. He steepled his fingers and leaned forward, his voice low and friendly. I understand, he said. I hear what you're saying. Mrs. Collins is a veteran teacher, and sometimes her methods can be traditional. My parents felt a flicker of hope. He was getting it, but then the tone shifted. The friendly mask slipped just for a second, revealing something cold and hard underneath. However, Mr. Albright continued, his voice losing its warmth, I have to say we get these kinds of complaints from time to time. Parents who think their child is special, that the rules shouldn't apply to them. My dad bristled. That's not what this is about. This is about fair treatment. Mr. Albright leaned back in his chair, a smug little smile playing on his lips. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, he said, and this was the line that ignited the war, you have to be very careful. Sometimes, when parents make a lot of noise, it can create a stressful environment. And that stress can unfortunately start to reflect on a student's work. It would be a shame if Leo's grades were to suffer because of this. The threat was unmistakable. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a promise. Stop complaining, or we will intentionally ruin your child's academic record. They were threatening to punish a 7-year-old boy to protect a bad teacher and avoid paperwork. My parents walked out of that office in stunned silence. The drive home was dead quiet. The weight of what had just happened settled over them like a thick fog. They had gone to the system for help, and the system had turned on them, baring its teeth. They were now in a situation that was so much worse than before. Not only was my teacher against me, but the beloved principal, the man who held all the power in that little red brick school, was her accomplice. They were a team, and they had just made it clear that they would use their power against my family. That night, I remember my parents talking in low, urgent whispers in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the anger in my dad's voice and the strained worry in my mom's. The feeling in our house, usually so warm and safe, was tense and cold. My parents felt cornered. In a small town like Maple Creek, the school principal is an important figure. To openly oppose him was to risk being labeled as troublemakers. People talked, reputations mattered. They worried that other teachers might treat me differently, that other parents would shun them. It felt like Mr. Albright held all the cards. For a few days, a sense of defeat hung over our family. My dad was quieter than usual, his face set in a grim line. My mom looked tired, her usual optimism replaced by a deep-seated anxiety. They continued to send me to school each day, and it felt like they were sending me into enemy territory. I didn't know the specifics of what had happened in that office, but I could feel the change. Mrs. Collins seemed colder than ever, her gaze lingering on me with an extra edge of something I couldn't name. It felt like I was walking on eggshells every second of the day. This was their lowest point. They had tried to solve the problem through the proper channels, and not only had they failed, they had made it exponentially worse. They had painted a target on my back, and the two people with the most power over my daily life were aiming right for it. They were faced with a terrible choice: either back down and let these two bullies control my educational future, or fight back and risk everything. My dad, the quiet man of principle, made the decision. One evening, he sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. Sarah, he said to my mom, his voice steady and resolved, we are not letting them do this. We are not letting them threaten our son. My mom looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. What do we do, David? She asked. We go over his head, my dad replied. We go to the one person he can't control. They spent the next week preparing for battle. This was no longer just about a complaint. It was about building a case. My dad, methodical and precise, started documenting everything. He wrote down the date of the first incident with the painting, the details of the parent-teacher conference, and a word-for-word account, as best he could remember, of the threatening conversation in Mr. Albright's office. He gathered my report cards and my graded work, showing the slow, steady decline that coincided with Mrs. Collins's increasing hostility. My mom, the librarian, did her own research. She went to the county's main branch and looked up the school district's policies, the official code of conduct for educators, and the state laws regarding student rights. She highlighted sections on professional ethics, retaliation, and the responsibilities of a principal. They were no longer just concerned parents. They were prosecutors building an airtight case. They called the office of the district superintendent. The superintendent was a man who oversaw all the schools in our county, a man whose office was in the city, far away from the small-town politics of Maple Creek. Getting a meeting wasn't easy, but my mom was persistent. She didn't just ask for a meeting. She stated that she needed to report a serious ethical breach and a direct threat made against her child by a school principal. That got their attention. A week later, they drove into the city. I just knew they were going to an important meeting. They were dressed in their Sunday best on a Tuesday morning, which was strange. My dad wore a tie, something he only did for weddings and funerals. My mom wore a sharp blazer. They looked like warriors heading into the Coliseum. As my dad tells it, the superintendent's office was intimidating, all dark wood and leather chairs. The superintendent was an older, serious-looking man who listened without expression as they laid out their story. My mom spoke first. She didn't sound like a worried mother. She sounded like a lawyer. She calmly presented the timeline of events, referencing her notes in the district's own code of conduct. She spoke about the pattern of behavior from Mrs. Collins and the chilling effect it had on me. Then it was my dad's turn. He spoke about the meeting with Mr. Albright. He wasn't emotional. He was factual, his voice low and firm as he recounted the principal's exact words. He explained how a man idolized by children had used his position of power to threaten a child's future to silence a legitimate concern. He pushed the folder of documents across the desk. This isn't just about our son anymore, my dad concluded. This is about a principal who believes he is above the rules and a teacher who is allowed to harm students without consequence. What are you going to do about it? The superintendent was silent for a long moment, looking through the papers they had provided. He read my dad's notes, he looked at my graded work, he scanned the highlighted sections of the district policy book. Finally, he looked up at them, and for the first time his face showed something other than neutral professionalism. It was a deep, serious concern. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," he said slowly, "thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is deeply troubling. You did the right thing by coming here." The meeting lasted for almost 2 hours. My parents left that office not knowing for sure what would happen, but they felt a shift. They had taken their one final shot. They had risked everything, dug deep, and presented their case with courage and dignity. The ball was no longer in their court. Back in Maple Creek, the next few weeks were strange. On the surface, nothing changed. I still went to Mrs. Collins's class. Mr. Albright still stood out front in the mornings. But there was a new tension in the air, a subtle electricity that I as a kid could feel but not understand. Unseen, an official investigation had been launched from the district office. People in suits started showing up at the school, observing classes and having quiet, closed-door meetings. Mrs. Collins became jumpy and irritable. Her already thin patience wore down to nothing. She started snapping at everyone, not just me. Mr. Albright's famous morning greetings became forced. His big, easy smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained grimace. He stopped making jokes. The fun movie star principal had vanished, leaving a stressed, worried-looking man in his place. The other teachers whispered in the hallways, casting nervous glances at Mrs. Collins in the principal's office. The whole school felt like it was holding its breath. Then one day in late spring, during a school assembly, Mr. Albright stood up at the podium. He looked tired and defeated. He announced that for personal reasons, both he and Mrs. Collins would not be returning to Maple Creek Elementary the following year. A wave of murmurs went through the student body. I remember feeling a pang of sadness. Mr. Albright was leaving. The principal we all loved was going away. I didn't understand the triumphant, silent look that passed between my mom and dad, who were standing at the back of the auditorium. The consequence of their final, desperate act was poetic. They hadn't just got 2 people fired. They had exposed a rot at the core of our little school and had it surgically removed. Mr. Albright, the man who threatened to quietly ruin my grades, had his career publicly dismantled. Mrs. Collins, the woman who tried to crush my spirit, was removed from a position where she could harm any more children. They didn't get yelled at. They didn't get into a big public fight. They were just gone. It was a quiet, devastatingly effective victory, achieved not with loud anger but with cold, hard facts and unwavering principle. The next school year, everything was different. I had a new teacher, a young woman named Ms. Gable, who loved my drawings and even hung one of them up on the wall. The new principal was a kind, professional woman who learned everyone's names without the showmanship. The school felt safer, calmer. It felt like a place for learning again. My love for school slowly returned. I started filling my notebooks with drawings again, my imagination reignited. My parents never gloated. They never told anyone in town what they had done. To everyone else, Mr. Albright and Mrs. Collins had simply moved on. But we knew the truth. We knew that 2 ordinary people, a lumber mill worker and a librarian, had faced down a corrupt system and won. It changed them. I think it solidified in them a quiet confidence, a knowledge that when pushed, they were stronger than they ever thought. And it changed me, though I wouldn't understand how, for many years. Now, when I sit by the creek that runs through our town, I sometimes think about that story. I think about the courage it took for my parents to fight that battle for me. They taught me that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest. They taught me that justice sometimes doesn't come with a thunderclap, but with a quiet, decisive action that changes everything. And every now and then, I'll see an old class photo with Mrs. Collins's tight smile and Mr. Albright's phony one, and I feel a chill. I realize that the biggest monsters aren't always the ones in my sketchbooks. Sometimes they wear friendly faces and hold positions of power, and the greatest heroes are the quiet, everyday people who refuse to let them win.